You asked for this, and we're gonna do it. This is a shootout between gasoline and E85. This is Engine Masters presented by AMSOIL, and finally we're doing the test that you've asked for. It's gonna be gasoline versus E85. And I admit I resisted doing this for a long time. And here's the reason. If you're gonna go to the pump, which is what an average guy is gonna do, and buy gasoline or buy E85, you don't really know what you're getting. There are so many different blends of fuels depending on location, emissions, time of year, and an E85, theoretically, that's 85% ethanol and 15% gasoline, but legally it can be as low as 70% ethanol, and it can be more than E85. And so doing a comparison of stuff that you pull out of the pump is not gonna be representative of what might happen in your neighborhood, and so it's kind of a worthless test. But here's how I solved that. We're gonna use Rocket brand products. This is Rocket brand 114 octane racing fuel. It's consistent, you know exactly what you're gonna get when you buy this thing anywhere and any time of the year, and the same is true for the Rocket brand E85 racing fuel that we're going to use. So now we have a level playing field. In the gearhead world, there's really three markets for E85. There's guys with boost who want to be able to run higher octane on the street. Then there's guys who just have a regular hot rod that would run on pump gas and they just want to know what E85 would do for them. But what we're going to address is the third category, which is like this engine right here. It's a big block Chevy. It's going to make 750 or 60 horsepower. It's 489 cubic inches, and the main thing you need to know about it is that it has 13.5:1 compression, so it will not run on pump gas. Therefore, you're stuck with race gas with an engine like this, and what we're going to show you now is what your option might be to run E85 instead and find out what the differences are, and also, does it make more power? And at the end, we're going to wrap up this whole show with a bunch of considerations about how you might run E85 or not. So we're going to go ahead and test it first with the Rocket brand 114 racing fuel before we hit it with some of the E85. We're going to head into the dyno and do that right now. AMSOIL time. So this engine is sort of a freak because on one hand, it's a street motor with a hydraulic roller cam and regular bearing clearances. And on the other hand, it has 13.5:1 compression and makes a whole bunch of power. So this time I'm gonna choose the Dominator Racing oil because we're not really worried about drain intervals and things like that on it. It has a high film strength that's gonna protect the bearings with that high compression. And man, I gotta tell you, the audience has just disappointed me with their demands for an actual funnel. Okay, so we have this thing on the dyno all ready to run Rocket brand 114 through it, right?
Yeah, it's a 13:1 compression motor. It'd get away with 112, but I just feel comfortable with 114.
So Steve's already got this thing tuned up. This thing likes 35 degrees of total ignition advance.
Yep.
Well, let's show him the baseline. So our baseline shows 635.6 pound-feet of torque at 5,700 RPM, and we made 761.5 all the way up at 6,700 RPM. So there's only 1,000 RPM spread there, but that's because the torque is real flat in here. You hear all the time, higher octane burns slower, and that is not the case. Octane's a rating to resistance to detonation. It does not affect the speed of the flame front. And I think it's the speed of the flame front that changes the optimum ignition timing.
Yes.
What about the old rule, more fuel, more timing?
More fuel,
power.
more timing?
Bump the cam, tip the mag.
Yeah.
How about lean is mean?
Lean is mean. That's another one. Yeah, fat is where it's at.
There's so many cliches, but really,
Fat and happy.
until you start testing it, you really don't know what the motor makes. It wants whatever makes the most horsepower.
Well, I was just digging into sort of this minutia that we don't normally talk about on the tuning on the dyno, just because I'm really curious to see how it changes when we go to the E85. So there's our baseline on the power and the tune-up on gasoline, 761.5 horsepower. We're gonna find out what the E85 does, and I don't even know. You say it's gonna make more mid-range. Do you have any clue?
It's gonna make more horsepower.
Yeah?
Yes.
I'm going to say it makes more from the starting point at 3,500 up through peak torque, but I don't think we're going to see a higher peak horsepower number.
Okay. Ready to pour E85 in it?
I am. I don't like the smell.
Really? See, I've got no experience with the stuff. Does it stink?
It smells like dirty socks.
Okay, you can handle that. Steve and I'll change the carburetor. How's
Perfect, that works.
This is gonna be the easiest changeover ever. First of all, we're gonna drain all of the gasoline out of all of our lines and replace it with the Rocket brand Racing E85 at 112 octane. That part's super simple. So is this. The carburetor that we ran in the gasoline application is from my favorite line of carburetors ever, the Holley XP. This is a 950 tuned for gasoline, and the good news is that Holley offers the exact same carburetor tuned for E85. It's got the same boosters, the same butterflies, the same venturi, the same radius entry, all of that stuff. It's tuned differently because there's a different energy in gasoline than there is in E85. Depending on what the mixtures are that you're getting, it's somewhere between a 20 and 30% reduction in BTU, or potential energy, with the E85. Because of that, to make it the same power as gasoline, you have to run 20 to 30% more fuel, and that's what this thing is tuned to do. Here's the last thing you need to know. When you see us tuning for air-fuel ratio in the dyno, you gotta know that our meter is calibrated for gasoline and will give you a different readout when running on E85. For example, at peak power, the E85 might want a true air-fuel ratio of 8.2 to 1, but because the meter is calculated for the different optimum air-fuel ratio on gasoline, it just reports it in a different scale. It's not wrong, it's just a different number. Okay, that was really complicated, but I know what you really gotta know, which is what is the power and tuning differences, and that's what we're gonna find right now as we go hang this thing on our big black Chevy. Yeah, here's the thing. I cannot stand it when people use a sealer between a carburetor and intake manifold. The gasket is good enough. Not saying I haven't done it, but you really shouldn't. However, if you are using any kind of a sealant in an application where there's gas touching it, then you do not want to use RTV like the Optimum Gray or Black. You also cannot use any anaerobic sealers. The Permatex packaging will say anaerobic. You can't use that either. You want to use a product called either PermaShield or Moto Seal. Those are solvent-based sealants and they can handle gasoline. But I'm hoping nothing ever has to touch E85. It's disgusting. We're about to switch to the Holley E85 tuned carburetor, but I want to show you a couple things. First of all, look how this is actually a Dominator flange for like a 4500 series Holley. Those carburetors, the XPs, are double drilled, so you can use either the 4500 or the smaller 4150 bolt pattern, which is cool. Also, this right here is the temperature probe that we are using to look at intake manifold temperature. When we're talking about ambient in the room 90 and in the manifold 50 on gasoline, that's what's telling us that. Throw on that new piece of jewelry.
That's too nice.
I've never had an E85 carburetor.
Me neither.
I can tell that's what it is because it says
What was the first clue?
E85 power like that.
Like that?
Yeah. This is going to be my first real E85 experience.
I really never knew it was this easy to become an E85 guy.
Just swap the carburetor,
I
you're
know.
done. Ready?
Yeah.
Okay, the black line is the E85 and red is gasoline, and it's up everywhere through the mid-range except for right up at the top. It's the same.
Yeah, it's within a couple numbers up here, and this is what I've seen in the past, is it makes more torque, but not necessarily more peak.
So I'd be inclined to go with the timing.
Gonna go put a couple degrees in, you think?
Yeah, I think it needs a little more timing with the E85, even though I have no experience whatsoever with it.
I was gonna
That would
say.
be my
And I was
theory.
saying, what would lead you to that
Well,
conclusion?
I think it burns slower
Because?
because it's got a lot of alcohol in it. Could be wrong, but that's what I'd go with.
That's what you're going with for
Yeah,
now.
and then I think it'll make more power than the gasoline too.
We can try timing, put a couple degrees in it.
Sure, try it. Okay, we're gonna go stab in a couple degrees of total ignition advance. Okay, we're gonna see what we get with 2 more degrees of timing.
No, didn't like that.
Looked like it picked up a couple pound-feet of torque.
Yeah, picked up tiny bit. That could be oil temperature.
We could add a little bit of fuel to the primary, just because it's not quite balanced for one, just to see if richening it up a little bit, if it seems to like that.
I was just thinking I'd love to splash a little more fuel in it.
Well,
I think nothing.
Let me go do that.
You want me to help?
We can go do that.
Here we go. Same, traded numbers left and right. I mean, it lost a couple pound-feet of torque, picked up 1 or 2 peak.
So once again, you're calling out of the box, almost the magic tune.
Well, I think there's a bigger window with the E85 than there might be with gasoline. It's not quite as sensitive. The last one of these I ran, it was pretty spiffy right out of the box. There wasn't much I could find with it.
Who needs EFI and custom tuners when you can take a carburetor out of the box and slap it on there and be done
See, if
with
that
it?
were gasoline, 4-jet size, you saw what happened when we had done it on gas.
Sure.
It improved it. Well, now,
Made not much difference, though it's more insensitive to the jetting number change. So where do we go from there? I mean, I feel like we tuned it up on gas and it was perfect. We took this carburetor out of the box, it was perfect.
I know it
You
feels
get
like
what you
we should be
get.
doing something to
Right.
it, huh? But we did, and it didn't change any.
I know. Salad bowl.
That's
the key.
Yeah.
Power-wise, there's no downside.
No,
Right.
none whatsoever.
What we're looking at here is the black line being E85, red line is gasoline. And our peak numbers are not very much different. So what you really have to pay attention to is the difference in area under that curve all the way from 3,500 up to 6,000.
There's 13 pound-feet of difference.
Yeah, the E85
Significant.
is better and cheaper and stinks.
Race gas smells good. This smells, well, not so good.
Let's have a look at the difference in intake manifold temperature, ambient versus manifold temperature. Okay, so all the way up at 6,800 RPM, on the E85, we had 87 degrees in the room and 47 in the intake manifold, so a 40-degree drop. On gasoline, it was 90 in the room and 51. It makes me want to get educated on it more and come back and do it on boost, because I think that is more what the average guy is looking to do with it.
Well, and I mean, how do you drive a motor like this on the street with 13-to-1 compression?
Well, you don't.
At $14 or $15 a gallon for race gas versus the cost of 91 octane.
Yeah, you just made me actually realize another benefit of what we just did. With the E85, it means you can have a 13.5-to-1 engine and drive it on the street.
Exactly.
Ding!
I thought that was the whole point all this time. What have you did?
That's why we picked this motor, because we didn't think it was much of an advantage with 10-to-1.
Well, I was thinking it was more like, oh, save money on race gas and find out, what the difference is in power. But yeah, if you can pour the E85 out of a pump into your 13.5-to-1 motor,
Yeah. Yeah, that's the big deal for NA
all of a
stuff.
sudden
and
it makes
blowers.
sense to live in the Midwest.
And you wick up the, like boosted stuff.
Yeah.
Run the boost way up that you can't do on 91 octane and you can on this.
Yeah, for some reason I got that, but the compression didn't.
Cylinder pressure.
Yeah, my cylinder pressure is leaking out my ear. It tells me it's worth learning more about.
Yeah, it's good.
I guess it'll be a later night than it is because we all need to go home and study.
Let's get out of here. It's time for the pros and cons of E85, but first I have to admit something.
Okay, I'm all ears. What you've got?
Well, if it wasn't obvious to the audience already, this is the first time I've ever actually run E85 in anything.
Well, I've got the edge on you, buddy.
But the thing is, we went away from my test and it gave me a bunch of questions, so I was able to go do some research, and I made notes, and I have a list. Let's go with pros and cons.
All right.
You can throw your personal twist into this.
I think octane per dollar, the ratio, it makes it a great value.
I didn't even think of octane per dollar, but you're
Yeah.
right, that's the perfect way to state that. So you can get basically high octane race gas on the street, so that's pretty good. It can be cheaper to buy than gasoline too. People think that adds up to being cheaper, but it gets worse miles per gallon, so I think it just adds out.
I completely don't care about fuel economy.
I know,
Let's
so
move
that's
on.
in the wind, who cares? Okay, here's the other thing is the tuning window is broader on E85 than it is on gas, meaning you can make the same power when you make mistakes on your air-fuel ratio. And I think what's good about that is that the various stuff that comes out of the pump, E70 to E90, whatever it is and everything, the reason all those guys get away with running boost on it is they just run them kind of fat and call it a day and it's all happy. And I think we saw that a little bit in our tuning. I'm out of pros. Do you have any more pros? Oh, it made more power.
It did.
Mostly.
We can't forget about that. That's what we're all about here.
So it made, what, 8 to 10 numbers all throughout the curve and then fell off and made the same horsepower. I think Brulet's got the right theory on that. Because you have to run more fuel with E85, the fuel droplets are taking up airspace.
Right.
And that would mostly happen at the higher RPM when it's pulling most fuel, right?
And pulling the most air, and the extra fuel displaces some of that air.
Exactly.
Hence, less power.
And that's probably why it rolls over up there. That's
Yeah.
just a random theory, but we could be correct. I sense that you've got the cons stacked up like dominoes, ready to just make your argument.
Well, there's just one that I'm really worried about all the time.
What's that?
Corrosion.
Oh, that is at the top of my list right after stinks.
Ooh.
Stuff is gnarly.
I didn't think it smelled that bad.
So one of the things that it eats really, really bad is, like magic, rubber hose, which is why we've got that sponsor Earls who does the Vapor Guard, and that is the whole point of this stuff, is that it is easy to use rubber hose that won't eat itself alive like most conventional rubber hoses will if you subject it to ethanol. Also, did you know that it is corrosive to aluminum?
Oh yeah, I've tested CCs and aluminum heads with alcohol and not dried it off.
Oh,
and
yeah.
then the next day it's all white powdery corrosion fluffing out.
Yeah. So the other thing is it's hydroscopic, and so it absorbs water and then that water separates, and so that leads to corrosion in and of itself. And think of this, if you've got a fuel system that's on the edge with gasoline,
good point.
like it's got a 5/16 line
Yeah.
on it, you just screwed the pooch for E85, you're gonna need to upgrade. You can need bigger fuel pump, bigger lines, all of that stuff. So that's just something to think about. Oh, here's another one. Did you know that the pump version is actually 105 octane?
Yeah, I mean, you don't know what you're getting though, depending on the alcohol content. It may be higher, maybe lower. Maybe they
You're
just
right.
picked a random number and said, we'll call it 105.
Here's the other thing about it, is even though it's rated at 112 octane, its numbers for the research and motor method for the octane rating are offset from gasoline in a way that means it's actually susceptible to pre-ignition.
I'll just take your word for it on
No,
that.
I mean, this is research that I did. I read last night some Marlon Davis stories and some SAE papers and stuff. You need to run a couple ranges cooler on your spark plugs if you're gonna run E85, and make sure you don't have any like carbon or hot spots in your chamber. I didn't know this one at all until I read it last night. You can't run paper fuel filter with the E85.
Oh, it'll eat it up?
It'll disintegrate. You gotta have a stainless steel fuel filter.
Wow.
So there's even more
That's a
expense
good one.
stacked up. And here's the last one that's sort of on that same note. If you have an electric fuel pump, whether it's submerged or whether it's a horizontal kind, the fuel flows around the pump and the motor mechanism and lubricates it. Well,
Yeah.
E85 doesn't have the lubricity of gasoline, and so you can foobar your electric fuel pump even sooner than you normally would, aside from the fact that you're already working it harder because it's delivering more fuel.
So what's the fix? Do you have some additive or something like that you can put in your E85?
Don't use the E85?
I kind of like the E85.
What?
Yeah.
I didn't expect that outcome. I have to admit, I think it's really cool that you can buy high octane gasoline at the pump for cheap. I think it's really cool that it makes power. But all of those downsides, for me personally, add up to no.
I like the fact that it's better than avgas at a lower price as far as octane. So
you would use
that's
it
a
in your
win.
car?
Yeah, that's a win.
You would use it in your car?
Oh yeah.
No, come on.
You may not know this, but in science lab in high school,
Yeah.
my project was converting an engine to run on denatured alcohol, which is ethanol.
Steve Dulcich invented E85.
A pioneer, see?
There'll be that and other fun facts to know and tell on future episodes of Engine Masters presented by AMSOIL.
I even got an A on that project.
You failed this one.
Did you happen to get a whiff?
It's terrible.
It's terrible.
It is stanky.
Ooh, I thought
It smells like Everclear that dirty socks have been washed in.
Yep. It's gross.
I thought it was a pretty tasty smell myself.
You would.